seemed to calm instantly at his touch, soothed into submission by the low, murmuring drawl of his voice. It was a talent that owners like Pascal Brameau were prepared to pay handsomely for. Even as a small boy, Bobby had showed no fear around violent, kicking stallions, animals that could easily have killed him with one carefully placed hoof to the head. Instead, he radiated a quiet, calm authority that even the most stubborn or disturbed horses seemed to respect. By the age of 12, he was breaking in wild mustangs for his father. At 16, he was earning pocket money doing the same thing with valuable standardbreds and quarter horses, the classic cowboy's mount, for other wealthy California breeders and owners. And by the time he hit 20, his reputation had spread beyond the state line. He spent what ought to have been his college years training difficult thoroughbreds on some of the most prestigious multi-million-dollar Kentucky farms, eventually getting commissions from owners as far afield as Ireland, Dubai, and most recently, the south of France. Born into one of the oldest, most respected ranching families in the West, Bobby grew up running semi-wild at Highwood, the stunning 3,000-acre Cameron ranch nestled deep in California's Santa Ynez Valley. All the local kids envied him his freedom. Neither of his parents seemed to mind much that he regularly skipped school to disappear into the hills on his father's horses. But in fact, his childhood wasn't the idyll it appeared. His mother, Diana, a teenage rebel from the Danish tourist trap town of Solvang, had conceived him during a one-night stand with his aging cowboy father, Hank. A local legend, the reclusive Hank Cameron was a natural with cattle and horses, but children were another matter entirely. Having acknowledged the kid was his and named him as his heir, he considered his paternal duties to be completely fulfilled. Beyond that, Diana was on her own. She loved her son, that wasn't the problem. But this was California in the early 70s, the era of free love and cheap drugs, and she was still only 17. Consequently, Bobby spent the first 10 years of his life on the road, traveling with his mother from one hippie commune to the next, never staying in one place long enough to put down any roots or make any real friends at school. Sometimes, overwhelmed by the responsibility of it all, Diana would disappear completely for months at a stretch, usually on the back of some scary-looking guy's bike. Terrified that she had gone for good, Bobby spent her long absences being passed miserably like an unwanted parcel from one distant relative to another. Eventually, of course, she always returned, disillusioned with her biker and full of kisses and promises to get her act together. But by then, it was too late. Her son had already learned two important life lessons: that loving people was a risky business, and that the only person he could truly depend on in this world was himself. Shortly after Bobby's 10th birthday, broke and exhausted, Diana decided to pay Hank Cameron a visit. Bobby would never forget the drive out to Highwood that day. It was the first time he'd seen the property that one day would be his, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Sitting in the front passenger seat of his mom's dilapidated VW bus, as they bumped and spluttered down the long winding drive, he gazed in awe at hills so green they looked like something out of a cartoon and seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see. All across this emerald canvas were grazing herds of cattle, searching for shade beneath the ancient sycamores that peppered the landscape, or making their way down to the river that rushed alongside the driveway like a dancing stream of molten silver. Not even in his imagination, on those many long, lonely nights when he'd lain awake fantasizing about the mythical Highwood, had he ever seen anything quite so beautiful. Hank, needless to say, was less than thrilled to see the pair of them. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked, as Diana clambered out of the bus, her dirty, skinny son loitering behind her like a stray dog. It wasn't exactly the welcome Bobby had hoped for. From the father he had long built up in his mind as some sort of cool, romantic hero, but he didn't dwell on it. By this time, he was used to being an unwelcome guest, and he was stoic when Diana announced she was leaving him with his father for the summer, while she went to try to find work in Santa Barbara.
"Leave him here? With me? You can't be serious,"
Hank spluttered incredulously.
"I don't know what to do with him."
"Yeah?" said Diana, climbing purposefully back up into the driver's seat. "Well, guess what? Neither did I when I was 17 years old and you sent me packing. But we did okay, right, Bobby? Now it's your turn." While the two of them fought it out, Bobby stood calmly on the porch steps beside the one pitifully small suitcase that held all his worldly possessions. Most of what they said was a blur, although he could remember his mother's parting words as she sped off down the driveway in a plume of dust. "He's your son, Hank," she yelled out the window. "Deal with it." Hank had dealt with it by ignoring his son completely.
"You do your thing, kid,"
he said, showing Bobby up to what would be his new bedroom,
"and I'll do mine."
And for the next 13 years, that was pretty much the way things had gone between them. Bobby never did go back to live with his mother again, although Diana continued to pay semi-regular visits and had him down to Santa Barbara for the occasional birthday or Christmas. But whatever disappointment Bobby may have felt at her abandonment, or Hank's lack of paternal concern, was more than made up for by the sheer magic of being at Highwood. Before that first summer was over, he had become fast friends with the other ranch hands' kids, but much more important, he'd discovered what was to become the one great love of his life: horses. For the first time in his life, he felt he really belonged somewhere. This, at last, was home. Vaulting down lightly from Mirage's back, he took off his hat, an automatic gesture of courtesy that belied the dismissive, irritated scowl on his face as he approached Henri.
"What's the problem?"
Handing the filly's reins to a hovering groom, he glowered at the French trainer. Even without the hat, Bobby stood a good 6 inches taller than Henri in his cowboy boots and jeans and looked an almost menacing figure. "You're breaking my concentration," he snapped. "I think you should leave." The already irate Duval now began to turn a worrying shade of purple. Having been let down by adults all his life, Bobby famously had zero respect for authority. It was a trait that had always infuriated his father, and it did him no favors with horse trainers either, themselves a notoriously difficult and arrogant breed.
"You think I should leave?"
Henri couldn't believe his ears.
"She is my horse, Monsieur Cameron. Tu comprends? Mine."
"Well now," Bobby smiled maddeningly, revealing a row of perfectly straight white teeth. "She's actually Monsieur Brameau's horse, isn't she, if we're going to get technical about it?" His voice was low and rich, like syrup, with a deep Western twang that seemed to soothe horses and excite women in equal measure. Unfortunately, it appeared to be having quite a different effect on the apoplectic Frenchman, who had started hopping from foot to foot with rage like a lizard on burning sand. "He hired me to do a job, and you're making that job impossible," Bobby continued. "I'd like you to leave."
"How dare you!"
Henri was livid. Who did this Yankee whippersnapper think he was, waltzing into his stables and presuming to tell him how to get the best out of the new filly? If Bobby hadn't been 6'4" of rock-solid cowboy muscle, he'd have hit him. As it was, the strain of holding himself back looked set to give him an imminent coronary.
"You arrogant little shit,"
he shouted.
What the fuck do you know about the Mirage? 4 days you